Hellfire and the Fall of Empire, a solo campaign by Jim Webster. This is a very detailed logistical exercise in which a solo wargamer can put together his own little map-based campaign in which the Decapolis, 10 cities on the edge of an empire, as the Imperial forces withdraw, are left to their own devices, and they are faced with the prospects of being carved up by the ravening hordes. Our particular instance of the Decapolis has seen Hippos come to the fore, it's the capital, and fight off a few incursions by barbarians, only to be riven by internal strife. When King Wargamius II died, he actually, but maybe he even unalived himself because he was so ashamed of having lost the city of Damascus. So Wargamius III took the throne, and the boy king, I guess, was ripe for the plucking, if you will, and not in a creepy way. The usurper, maybe his younger brother, maybe an uncle from Kanatha, launched a civil war and declared himself the rightful ruler of the Hippopolitan area. So now the Kanathan Republic has launched a crusade to unite the Decapolis under the single banner, which looks a little something like this. We take our inspiration from the greatest source of stories ever, the real world. In 2951 AD, he was able to secure 6 cities altogether. 5 of these cities immediately rallied to his banner. These 4 over here, and of course, Kanatha is the seat of his power. He took Philadelphia last year, and the King Wargamius III is struggling to maintain his grip on power. In our last episode, we rolled some dice, and it turns out, 2952, the barbarians are either licking their wounds in the case of 2 of these barbarian hordes, tribes, they're not really a horde, the Popular Front, the Tilian Republic, the Wheelian Supremacy. These guys are all fairly advanced in their own right. They are just their own little independent kingdom on the edge of the empire, and they see an opportunity to carve off, like I said, little slices of the Hippopolitan area now that the Imperial Navy is gone. They backed off. They said, listen, you guys need to fix yourself, sort your internal strife. Although boys from the Macha, some of the Machans, and some of the Wheelian Supremacy boys decided that this would be a good opportunity to sell their services as mercenaries to one or the other factions. And so this is what has happened. In our last video, the 2 sides, the Kanathans and the Hippopolitans, I guess we'll call it the king and the usurper, both decided, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire a unit or 2 of these mercenaries to help me with my military strategy. We rolled some dice to find out what that strategy would be, and the usurper has decided to attack Gadara in the month of May. Here's a little map of what that looks like. He's going to launch a pincer movement from Garasa and from Hippos, and he's going to take Gadara with everything he has. He hired... what did he hire here? He hired a unit of Machans, 2 companies of infantry, 1 company of mounted, and an artillery unit. That's going to happen in May. The kingdom, Wargamius, he said, I'm buying myself some aircraft, because the big reason that he wasn't able to attack Kanatha last year is because he does not have air supremacy. Well, we have to sort that out now, because he does have a squadron, very expensive from a financial perspective. The Wargamius had the war chest, lots of money, but he now has far fewer population. So on a year-to-year basis, he is going to lose the attritional battle of manufacture. We got 2 manufacturing centers versus 1, and anybody that's played Axis and Allies knows whoever can get to the front with the mostest in a battle of attrition is going to win. You really don't want to give up your manufacturing capability. Particularly, don't give your manufacturing capability up to your enemies. You would think this would be basic, but I live in one of the most powerful empires that the world has ever seen, And it decided to do just that over the last 50 years. And oh boy, howdy, is it causing us some problems today. Point being, in a protracted conflict, the guy that's got the most money is going to win. The guy that can produce the most stuff and get it to the front is going to win. And it looks like that's going to be the rebels. The real question is going to be what happens when these barbarians realize that the rebels are about to win and this is the opportunity to strike. Let these guys fight it out. Let them attrit themselves. Let them blow up their stuff. They'll be weakened. Even if the usurper wins, it's going to be a problem for him later. But we don't have to worry about that. That's for next year. This year, the barbarians, as I said, are kind of sitting on the bench. They're watching from the bleachers. For his part, Wargamius, because he has these air power that he needs to work into his forces, decided to wait till a little longer, a little later in the season. He decided, well, what he's going to do is attack Garasa. That's this city right here. Let me show you that map again. But is he really? You know, in the early part of the year, he's going to rally his forces and bring them to Gadara, but Gadara is going to be attacked. So before we can figure out what happens in the second half of the year, we have to figure out what happens in this battle in May. And what we can do to figure that out, we're going to do things a little bit different. We've played around with just some, just back of the envelope calculations. We tried to use limited language model, which, I mean, it was okay, but it was kind of dumb, and it did things in a really weird, bizarro world way. Don't recommend it. Leave those things alone. Even in something as pointless as this, they don't know what they're doing. So let's take a look at what we have available here, right? First of all, for the Philadelphians and Hippopolitans, for these, or Garasans, for the usurper trying to attack Gadara, Gadara has a population of 10. It continues to have a population of 10, I think. Let me check my population chart over here. Yeah, it does. So this is my chart for the population. You can see here, Gadara is a financial center. It's got a population of 10, which means we can bring to the fore 5 companies of expeditionary forces. These are semi-pros. This is kind of a National Guard. And 5 companies of militia. For every one of those we buy, we have to pay for that. And this is one of the things I've been doing wrong in recent videos. I finally got around to it. Thank you to those of you who knew this and didn't yell at me in the comments. Thanks to those who did know it and told me in the comments, and because I record these things several weeks out, I just didn't get around to it. So here's what we're looking at. If I want to hire 5 companies of expeditionary and then 5 companies of home defense, it's going to cost me $1,500 plus another $750, $2,250 for the defense force if I call them up. And there's something about, right, it says they're cheaper to raise, plus you need to raise the equipment. I have been tracking this. I really probably should have said, because it gets a little too complicated, to be honest with you. So in addition to the $2,250, I'm going to have to, that's another $250 just to get them going, another $500. So for $3,000, I can have 10 companies of militia. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to spend that money. We need to win this defensive battle if we're going to take any more territory, speaking on behalf of King Wargamius. So the first thing we do is we say, okay, that's going to cost me $3,000. Now, he's got 163,000 kilocredits to his name. We may next year, if things go poorly, we may decide that he's going to run for Kaizen. He's going to self-exile and try to escape with the family jewels intact and the family fortune in the hull of his ship. We are going full Portugal on the eve of Napoleon's arrival. All told, the Gadaran defenders have their 10 companies of locals. They have 1 regiment of infantry, 3 companies of infantry plus a medium tank company. They don't have any artillery, but they do have a battery of counter artillery. They have a counter battery with electronic countermeasures. They do have 3 attack aircraft. Then they have a reserve of another regular infantry battalion. Again, that's 3 companies, but this one has a heavy tank company attached to it. That's the reserve. They don't want to commit that. They want to use those guys on the offensive. Likewise, I think we're not going to commit these 7 infantry plus the artillery plus the tank. I think instead we'll just bring these 3 infantry. These are the 2 forces of the Wheelians that the King Wargamius has hired. They're on the defensive. Now the rebels they have a single battalion, and that is 3 companies of infantry. but these are veteran infantry. They have 1 aircraft squadron, they have 2 units of artillery, and then they're Makan allies, 2 companies of infantry, and 1 mounted and 1 artillery. So this attack, there's not a whole lot here, to be honest with you. I think they're surprised. I think they didn't realize that the Wargamius was going to be generating his own aircraft squadron out of Dion, right? So Dion here, I can draw a little airplane, I think. I don't know if that looks like an airplane to you, but it looks like, well, I'm not going to draw that like that. That's pretty bad. Let me try a silhouette this way. There we go. I think that looks a little better. That's a little more like an aircraft. Okay, I know it all looks like bugs to you. What are you going to do? These are the airfields that are the most defensive. It's a surprise, but we got to figure out, what does that mean as far as we've got 3 aircraft? And so to figure this out, what I'm going to do is, this is a little different. Before, we had air supremacy for one side or the other. And I think maybe before I even get to the aircraft, I should explain how we're going to do this. I have to thank a friend of the channel, Caleb Hines. You remember we named one of our Orcish warlords Caleb Hines after him. He said, hey, if you're really looking for a better way to do this, a little more methodical way to work through a battle like this without having to muck around with a bunch of miniatures, which you can. Old Jim Webster, he wrote this Hellfire, and it's a really good system. Each stand is basically a platoon, and so each company has like 10 platoons in it. I think that's how that works. But I don't have 1/300 figures, so I haven't been doing it that way. And I'm far more interested in the logistics and organizing, like, how do you set up these tabletop battles? Now, our tabletop battle, we've got our orders of battle, and they're not particularly fair to the attacker in this case. But that's okay, because there's other things going on here. And I maybe will, yeah, anyway. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So Caleb said, hey, take a look at this simple combat resolution using dice. And it's discussed a little bit over at Wargaming Miscellany. That is old Bob Cordery's blog. Recommend you check that out. Go give Caleb a follow. It's just like it sounds. Caleb Hines, at Caleb Hines over on Twitter. And basically, this system, I know you can barely read the graphic here. Essentially, what you do is you say, look, if one side has about 4 units and one side has about 8 units, there goes my dice. You just roll these dice and you play a really complicated game of Risk. So I will work through kind of a basic example, and then we'll think about what that means for our wargame. So you roll these dice, and maybe these guys aren't nearly as good as these guys. So they have a long march, they're tired, they're inexperienced, they don't have as good a equipment. So subtract 1 from all of these dice. And these guys have great esprit de corps, so add 1 to all of these. And then match them up by highest to lowest, and you just discount all of the extras that aren't getting used, right? So these are the 3 highest, and then we have 1 more here, and then you compare and say, okay, who won which? This was a 3, but it doesn't matter. So these are just chances, extra chances to beat this. 6 versus 5. This is a loss. So this unit over here gets pushed back. This is a loss, so that unit gets pushed back. This is a tie, so we just ignore that. And then here we have another loss. So as you can see, this battle is 1 victory to the elite guys to 2 victories for the Horde army, even though the Horde army isn't doing so hot. And then you can do another round of battle where you go, okay, look, these guys lost 2 out of 3, so that means they've lost their +1 advantage. And on our second day of battle, it's going to be these guys are no longer +1. They have to go. So if you compare the 2 highest, we have a tie there. It's going to make it a lot harder for these veterans to overcome the swarm tactics. Even at -1, that's a victory for red. That's a victory for red. That's a victory for red. Again, it's not that these didn't do anything. It's just that they give you chances to beat. So in this case, we had 1 tie, red overwhelms, and now you do this again. And after like 3 losses, so the blue army has lost twice now, right? So you can kind of use those results to generate an infinite number of possibilities, and those can help inform things like losses. Again, that is Simple Combat Resolution Using Dice. It is by Timothy McCoy Price. And it was in a 1996 version of. I'll try to remember to put the issue number right here and the actual reference. You can go look that up, or I might even put I might put the link to Bob Cordery's blog, because Bob's an interesting guy and you should be reading his blog on the regular anyway. In our fight, both of the air forces have 3 aircraft in their squadron. And the question is, they have to set these up as one of two different things. They can either try to fight for air superiority, or they can go with ground attack. Here's the thing. If you have all three as ground attack, but your opponent goes for full air superiority, they're going to completely cancel out, right? So the question is going to be, how many resources are you putting into air superiority? And that's what these cards are here. I'm going to shuffle these up so I don't know which is which. And then, sorry for the flashing for any of you that are suffering from any kind of vision or, if I'm triggering any seizures here, I apologize. So I've mixed them all up. And I'm going to turn over cards. And there's either going to be a 1, 2, or a 3 on each of these. We're going to do black for the usurpers' forces, red for the loyalists, and we'll have to figure out what it means. This, again, is the number of air superiority. Okay? So hypothetically speaking, the loyalists might want to achieve total air superiority. They've got numbers on the ground. On the other hand, they may say, look, I'm not too concerned about it. For every aircraft that cancels out, it cancels out. I'm not going to go through all 9 possibilities. I'm just going to turn them over and we'll figure out what it means. Okay, so both of these guys are going 2 to 2. And so what this means is I can do my little battle. And the real question here is, who is going to win the battle for air superiority? Who gets that one last plane that's going to be able to do air missions? And we will use the SCRUD, the simple combat resolution using dice. Now, I've only got 2 planes fighting for air superiority, so I'm just going to roll these 2 dice. And they are both now, the usurper, his guys are experienced. These are Imperial forces. These are green forces that are first time in. So I'm going to give a +1 to each of the red dice. And because they are otherwise evenly matched, it gives the veterans a little bit of an advantage, but maybe not complete. So we line these up. That is a 7 and a 6. And what that means is that the air superiority is clearly won entirely by the usurper's forces. But he had to spend 2 of his points to do that. He's only got 1 combat mission that he can fly. And what that means is when I roll the dice for the ground combat, I'm going to give, because of air superiority, I'm going to give, I think maybe what we'll do is we'll say, let's give the 2 highest dice a +1. So it's not everywhere. Can't be everywhere. But it is enough to give a little bit of an advantage to the usurper's forces. And that's going to be important because each one of these dice should theoretically represent an equivalent amount of manpower or fighting power. And the veteran mechanized infantry for the usurpers are going to be outnumbered in this case. I've got a lot of different colored dice here because I've got a lot of different kinds of companies of attackers here in this case. Over here, the rebels have 3 units of veteran infantry. We're going to give them +1 for being veteran. We have 2 units of Machins. Now, they are backed up by artillery and a tank company. That's important, and we'll talk more about that. I've got 5 units of expeditionary. They're at -1. This is our regular loyalist infantry. They are fighting neutral. And then I've got 3 companies of Wheelians. They are backed by artillery. And so the artillery we got to talk about a little bit here, okay? Because the usurper is bringing 2 units of artillery, but the loyalists have 1 counter battery, which is going to negate some of their firepower. Between the aircraft and the 2 artillery, negated somewhat by this, I'm going to rule that each one of these dice has a +1. These guys are also backed by, let me just check my orders of battle here. I think they're also backed by, yep, they've got artillery and tanks. So again, +1, everybody over here. And it's getting complicated enough. Maybe I want to write all this down. And I can even just put that on Post-it notes. Everybody is at +1. See, that'll make it easy to remember because it gets more complicated over here. So we've already taken into consideration all of the artillery. These guys have artillery, so that's actually, kind of negating some of that, but they're going to be fighting with the tank, with the artillery. They're going to be at +1. Our experienced troops are going to be neutral, and these are going to be at -1. That's basically how it's all going to shake out. And we'll roll them all. So these are all +1, and if I wanted to, I could just, but not a great roll across the board there. If I wanted to, I could flip them all 1 up. but I'm going to leave it as is. As I said, these guys are at +1, and these guys are at neutral, and these guys are at -1. So after I roll all of these, then I need to start lining things up. All right, I can take off. That's a 0. That's not going to be an issue. Ooh, we can actually hear the fireworks. I hope my microphone's picking that up. So as I said, this is the highest one. It's neutral. That's a 5. We can line that up with the highest, and it doesn't matter which of these high ones we want. That's going to be a win for the red. And I'm going to put my winning combinations up here, okay? We'll put the winners up in the corners. Let me give myself a little bit more space here. See? And then this is going to be a 5, and this is going to be a 5, so they're going to cancel out. I think that's it. This is neutral, remember. This is a 5, so that's a win over here. Then we have a 4 versus here's a neutral, so those two cancel out. And then we have a 2 versus, and so that's going to be a win over there. So the defenders are able to win, and you can actually back calculate and go, okay, well, look, the Wheelians they're the only ones that had any real successes against these guys. And what we'll do is say with 1 versus 2, since these guys have won, we're going to remove 1 die from the dice pool of the usurper. Or we just negate the +1, right? They didn't win on day 1, so they have to re-roll. And we just go through the process a couple of times until we achieve some kind of an amiable result. So these guys are all going to be at, well, we still have the aircraft, right? So maybe we say this guy, it becomes a 5. We'll give a +1 to the highest die over there. We have to roll for the Wheelians again, but we're going to take one of those off because they took a pounding, and they're going to be at +1 because they still have their artillery and their heavy tank. So that's going to be our result for the forces of the usurper. They need to spend a lot more money. They just don't have the money to spend. But at least maybe they'll be able to hold off the enemy just a little bit longer. So then we have to roll for our 5. These are all at -2 now because they're tired and they are spent. So this becomes a 4. That's going to be a 1, which won't factor in. And then these become a 2 and a nothing. So in a pinch, those expeditionary companies will be glad to have them there, right? We did have 3. Oh, you know, we should probably use a different colored die for that. It's going to be a 4, 2, and a 2. There we go. So there's our loyalists. I think I changed color die. Don't hate me for that, okay? And then we have our 3 regulars, and they're going to be at a straight neutral. And then we do still have our 1, 2. Let's roll up a black die. There we go. These are our Wheelian allies who are kicking butt and taking names. In fact, the allies are going to win 1 for the Gipper there. And then we have a 3 versus a 4. That's going to be a win there. And then we have a 4 and a 1. And it's going to be a total. So the defense of Gadara is successful beyond their wildest dreams. Except that the defenders are going to fall back they'll scatter. And I think our next battle, so the real lesson here is, let me just bring up that chart again. The attack on Garasa can continue, but that's going to cost some money. See how Garasa, it says here, has 11. We're going to go ahead and we got to go big on this one. We only have a reserve of 6,000 for the rebels. We're going to hire, same thing. We're going to wind up hiring 5 and 5. And we already said that costs 3,000. So that's going to be 3,000 credits. And now the advantage is going to be on the part of the rebels once again. Except, well, maybe. I got to put together the orders of battle here. But before I do, I have to figure out, were there any, what casualties were there? And how is this failed attack going to affect the defense of Garasa? It looks like the Loyalist is hoping to cut these cities off, which they don't really have enough forces to blockade, but maybe that's part of a greater strategy to hit Garasa and then come after Philadelphia and Kanatha. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. What matters for right now is we had 3 aircraft versus 3 aircraft. Were any of those aircraft knocked out of the sky? And again, it's maybe 3 squadrons of aircraft, right? Maybe there's 3 planes in each. So losing 1 plane might not be enough, or losing 2, but is it enough to affect this next battle here? And so I'm going to roll a d6 first for the rebels, and on a 1, they only have 2 air power. And then I'll do the same thing for the Loyalists. So the Rebels only have 2, and the Loyalists now have 3. So it's going to cost the Loyalists, I'm going to have to make a note here somewhere, that the Rebels now are going to have to pay, so let me write down some losses here, because there's going to be more. The Rebels are going to have to replace one of those air power, and that's going to cost them money in the next year to bring them up to speed. It's going to, cost money to repair the others, but it's kind of lost in the wash and the froth and the rounding errors. Okay, that's one thing. Now, the other question is, did they lose a company of their veteran infantry on a roll of a 1? They did. Okay, they did not. So they suffered some losses, but they have 4 months to kind of rest, recuperate, retrain, and get ready for the defense of Garasa. Then we have to decide what happens to their allies, and I think the Machans say they suffered enough losses to their infantry, no infantry, but they will stick around with their artillery to help with the defense of Garasa. So that's going to give the Rebels a total of, well, and what about losses for the defenders, right? The first question is, did the Wheelians take any? And with a result of a 5, they did not. What about the local mechanized infantry? They did not. So there were some casualties, but again, it's been 4 or 5 months. Time to replace, time to retrain. Call them up from the depots, the replacement depots, and we can just move forward with this. And I would also add, maybe it would be better to have losses on a 1 or a 2, but if you have spent the money, and this is where it's really good to have stuff like a field medical team, right? Because this reduces your chances of suffering casualties. The Loyalists absolutely do. I'm not too concerned about it. And I think the fact that we lost the aircraft means that altogether, the attack was fairly punishing. And in fact, we may decide, and they lost the ability to use their allied Wheelian infantry. So they have fewer available for defense. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look at, I just kind of did a real quick calculation here for who the Rebels have. They're calling up their 5 companies of expeditionary forces. We've spent the money for those. We do have a second line of defense. We'll fight a second battle with those 5 militia forces. But for now, they've got the aircraft squadron, the Kanathan. So again, I got to figure out how many air power are being dedicated to air superiority for the Rebels. And it's going to be on a 1, 2, or 3, it's only one of them. Yeah, so they have 1 air superiority. And then we divide this by 2, and it's 1 air superiority. So they kind of drive each other off. And now the attackers have control of the airways. And they have 2 units capable of providing bonuses to the attackers. So in the end, so after a prolonged, like a week-long engagement, the Rebels aren't going to have any air power available. Oh, it's actually, you know what? I take it back. Oh, yeah, because they only had 2 air power available. They used 1 for air power. These guys used 1, they negate, and so the Loyalists have 2 power, right? So that's going to be, I'm going to write a little times 2, because they get 2 little bonuses. If you take a look at this, in addition to the 5 companies of expeditionary infantry, which, I guess so we can actually lay these out now. Each company gets you a die. So there's your -1, because they're just noobs called up. Then we have the Kanathan veteran infantry. So we'll use these 3 white dice for those Kanathans, for those infantry. Now they are backed up by 2 battalions of artillery, actually 3 altogether, but because of the ECM, it's really only going to count as 2. So we got some big bonuses on this side. And then, wow, look at all of this. We've got 10 companies of the Wheelians. I'm going to use the blue dice for those. I happen to have 10 of those. So that's our Wheelian infantry. That's both the original 7 and the 3. All of these are going to be at +1. We only have 6 companies, and I'm really hurting for colored dice that would help us. So we only have 6 companies of mechanized infantry. So there you go. So these are the actual Loyalist forces. And again, these guys are fairly experienced. They're fairly fresh. Maybe the guys that fought in the earlier are a little tired, but they have a little more experience. So again, I think what we're going to wind up having here is -1 on these, +1 on these, like just talking neutrally. And then neutral, and again, I think neutral, the experience and the weariness, it all kind of balances out. However, the Rebels have the advantage in artillery, and they can task one of those with keeping the planes away from town, and that means that these guys are only going to have the 1 plane that will give +2 to the 2 highest dice here. The planes are supporting their guys. Everything else is a wash. So these guys, highest 2 dice get a +1. These all get a +1. And then these are all neutral, and these are all -1. Okay, so these are all going to be +1s. And pretty good dice for the Royalists. Boy, the dice weren't kind last time. This time they really are. And then these are all at -1, which means, oh boy, I didn't see what that was. I think that was a 3. Oops, I should have rolled the ones furthest from the camera first, I guess. Let's not face that mistake again. So these are all our neutrals, and look at that. We get a total of 4 6s over here. And well, but wait a minute, we have to line up all. We have a whole lot of lineups to do. Again, remember these are all at -1. So if I wanted to here, I could say, okay, these are going to be 1s. This will be a 2, and I don't have to remember this anymore. 3 and a 4. And then because of the heavy artillery, I think these guys are all at +1, so I can turn this to a 5, 4, and I think that was a 3. But I'm not sure how much it's going to matter, because the 4 highest dice, right? So these are neutral. These are actually, I think we said these are +1. These are going to negate the 4 highest. And so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have this 3 is going to be tied. And then we have 1, 2, 3 that are going to win this. So that means that we had no victories on the part of these guys. All right. And we can roll again. So that means we're suffering some pretty heavy casualties. We'll take off a couple of dice. These are not, actually we'll take off 2 of those. So these are at -1. So that becomes a 0. These are at +1. I'll go ahead and roll those. A little higher this time. All of these are neutral. And then these are going to be at +1. So again, big rolls. We got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 6s, which will negate these. Well, this is a 7. So that's 1 casualty there. This is a 5 and a 5, which is going to lose across the board. So a smashing success. And the Loyalists have now managed to retake Garasa. What kind of casualties are we looking at? Well, let's look at the planes again. For the rebels, they don't lose, and for the Loyalists, they don't lose. But because it was such a huge defeat, and because there's now a line going across here, we may have to send some forces to Philadelphia and Kanatha. This is where you may want to start worrying about things like, army markers and orders of battle for those individual armies. I'm not going to do that again because I'm chiefly interested in the economic and like socio-political. Can you call it that with the barbarians? Not really. But what I will say is this. The fighting for Garasa was much bloodier. And so what I can do is roll for, here's what we'll do. I'm going to roll for each company in this case, okay? So for the Wheelians, because this will be important. I don't think we need that red die there. Every single one is a reduction in their ability to fight. So this becomes, yeah, because we have the field hospital, every single one, it's going to be on a 1 or a 2. So this becomes 9 companies. Remember, we have another battle to fight because they now have the option. I think we're going to try to attack Philadelphia next. So 9 there, and then we can roll 6 dice for the mechanized infantry. And again, any 1s will be knocked out of the fight for next month. On the part of the rebels, it's going to be on a 1 or a 2. Well, the 5 expeditionary company don't matter, but we do need to worry about these Kanathan veteran infantry. There's the 3 of them. On a 1 or a 2, they're no longer available. So this Kanathan veteran infantry company is now, or battalion, I should say, is down to just 2 companies. And they'll be available for the defense of Philadelphia. That's the one that makes sense. Remember, this was September. So in October, that army is going to roll on into Philadelphia. Garasa is taken. Is there anything else we can worry about? We did the aircraft, ECM. Right, the 2 battalions of artillery. Did anything happen to them? On a 1 or a 2, they're out. Yeah, so one of those is destroyed. And that will be... it's not necessarily destroyed, but it's going to have to be replaced, right? And on a 1, 2, or 3, it's the Kanathans. On a 4, 5, or a 6, it's the Imperial. So the Imperial Artillery Battery is knocked out for the year and will have to undergo serious repairs to be available for the next campaign season. So that was the battle for Garasa using the SCRUD. And then we still have to do one more, the battle for Philadelphia. And here's where things get interesting. We're going to use the mercenaries. Remember the unpopular front. Our loyalists are spending 6,000 credits on those guys per year. That's the monthly cost. They're going to hold Garasa along with... who else do we want to maintain? We're not going to leave those Wheelians. We're going to use them on the attack. I think we can probably leave one of our... Let's leave the medium tank, the regular infantry with the medium tank company in support. We're going to bring the heavy tanks over to attack Philadelphia. That means that our order of battle will be for the Loyalists attacking Philadelphia. 3 companies of mechanized infantry plus the heavy tanks. They are bringing 7 infantry of Wheelians. They're not bringing both units. Remember that we had hired on 2 units, one for like 3,000 credits. This is the notes from last year. So we had these 3 infantry artillery tank. Oh, but they took a beating. So these guys are going to go home, and we're just going to have the one, and that's going to make it a little bit more fair of a fight, and I think that's we're kind of justified, right? Because it's late in the season, and we made the mistake of paying them a little too much, so they're gone. But that means we do have a 10-7 advantage here, plus the Loyalists still have 3 air power to the 2, so how many are they going to dedicate to air superiority? They're going to dedicate all 3, and so there's no hope for the Rebels, who are going to dedicate, just 1 to air superiority, but that other guy is going to get chased off. Because they had a 1v3, the one guy is going to be removed on a 1 or a 2. All right, he's okay. The 1v3, did he take anyone with him? No. And then what about the guy who's doing the attack, the attack aircraft for the Rebels? On a 1 or a 2, he's shot down. So he is shot down. The Rebels have now lost 2 aircraft. 1 lost because he got shot down. They didn't realize how important air superiority was. So the Rebels are now down to just 1 airplane. And it goes back to Hippos. That's where the aerodrome is. Now, they are outnumbered in artillery. They only have the 1 artillery that is sticking around to 2 for the Loyalists, and the Loyalists have ECM. So really, this is largely going to cancel this out. And that's kind of where we're at. Because we have so many more tanks on the part of the attackers, we're going to buy 4 companies of expeditionary military at 500 apiece. Why are we doing more? We could take, remember, Philadelphia has 10. We could hire 5 altogether. The problem is the Rebels don't have enough money to do that. They can't afford it. They've only got 3,000 credits left. If they spend 2,000 on the defense... Wait, it's 300 each, right? So they could spend 1,500. If we do 4, that's going to leave us with 1,800 credits to maybe cobble something together for next year. They just don't have enough money. They're being outspent, and that's the problem. So we wind up with 4 companies of expeditionary forces. They're not too bad, but again, for the Rebels, what that means is we're going to have 4 dice at -1 because they're just hastily called up. For the... and then we're going to have 3 dice. Let's just do all of these first. And then so we're doing the Rebels. So that's 4 for the expeditionary, 2 for the veteran, and then that's it. And these guys are going to be at -2. These guys are going to be at -1 because of the overwhelming attack power that the Loyalists are bringing to bear. Now they have 3 mechanized infantry, but I'm going to have to use the blue dice for the Allies. And so what color do I have left? Green and yellow for the Loyalist regulars. That's the Loyalist regulars. The Barbarian Allies, because they have all the tank support, these guys are all going to be at +1. They got the tanks on their side. They got the artillery on their side, 2 units. I'm going to add 2 to the 2 highest dice. These are guaranteed winners right there, baby. And then these guys are just the expeditionary. They're all at -1. So that's going to be a 5. And then this will be a 2. And this becomes a 1 and a 1. So I need a 1, 1, and 2. So that's the result. And then for the 2 regular companies that normally we get to +1, that's going to be a 2. And that's going to be... So these 2 are going to win against these two dice. And I don't even think we need the rest of these, because 1s and 2s are going to get beat by everything else. We've got a lot of 6s, and if you line them up by size, it's just going to be a total bloodbath, and it's going to eliminate this veteran mechanized infantry from the field. The only thing that the rebels have left as far as the regular forces are concerned is these 4 companies of expeditionary forces. And then we don't even have enough to bring up the local militia, so that's really going to end it. Except that I still need to figure out what kind of casualties we face on the side of the Loyalists. I'm not going to roll for the air power, of course, and the Wheelians go home at the end of the season, which means all I need to do is roll for these 3 companies of Loyalists. And on a 1, so we do lose 1 company, we're going to have to pay to replace that. 1 lost. And so really, the reason I'm going through all that is that I need to be aware that we've got the rebels lost 2 planes this year. And we need to pay to replace that and these, and I think that's really about it. But it does give me, the one thing I didn't work into this is I worked in the field medical. I didn't work in the engineer battalion. We've got 4 companies of engineers. They might have been able to make a difference as well, but I wasn't quite sure how to use them in this nice little SCRUD thing. And so thank you for those of you who've been thinking about how can we help this goofball play his miniature war games without miniatures. How can we have an interesting and satisfying battle experience that allows for the odds to swing wildly in the favor of those who are outnumbered, while really favoring those who went to the trouble of buying the resources to be at the advantage. Ultimately, as a result of this campaign season, the Wheelians got a lot of really valuable intel. The Loyalists are the big winners here. The Loyalists successfully defended Gadara, and they were able to push back and take Garasa and Philadelphia. So just to show you how I'm going to go back, I need to spend an hour or 2 kind of working this over. So Philadelphia, I got to erase that. And then Garasa, right? So Philadelphia and Garasa are no longer part of the usurpers' forces. They are back under the protective wing of King Wargamius III. That means that next year, these impoverished guys, now the good news is they have fewer forces to pay for, but they don't have any regular forces left to call on. I have a second sheet here that shows that they have, wait, where's my second sheet with there? Yeah, so the only regulars that they had was the 1st Canothan veteran infantry. And they are down to just, well, they're gone. The 1st Canothans have been wiped out in the unsuccessful defense of Philadelphia. Now, maybe there are some rump forces that were able to retreat to Kanatha, but they're basically done as a fighting force. We're going to have to build a whole new force from scratch. The aircraft squadron, based out of Hippos, is down to just 1 plane. So to pay to recover those 2 is going to be really hard, particularly because the Empire is not sending any more spare parts. Not only that, but the income, because both Garasa and Philadelphia are lost, is going to go down by 21, which means this becomes a 33, which means they're bringing in 66,000 credits. And for the 66,000 credits, man, they're not going to be able to afford a whole lot. The good news is they don't have to pay these guys. That's 20. That's 15. So you basically multiply these by 10, 30, 45, 60. That's all they got. They're still running at a deficit. They may have to send the support battalion home, and this may be the only thing keeping them afloat because they just can't afford it. So it's going to be all down to the militia. What does that mean ultimately? In the long run, just kind of looking ahead, I think what it means is that Wargamius is going to be able to retake all of the cities that he needs, but he's going to burn his war chest, and he really has to cross his fingers and hope that there isn't a major incursion by one of these barbarian hordes next year. Because if there is, he is going to be facing some very difficult decisions. And when I say he, I mean we, because we are Mr. Wargaming, and these are the kind of decisions that we thrive on. We're drawn to this hobby because of this desperate hoping to just hold it together for 1 more year. Even as things are falling apart around you. That's just kind of who we are as men of the West. And I hope that this inspires you a little bit to get up tomorrow and go about your day. And just even if things aren't going great, just hold it together for a little while longer. There's a lot of us out here that are pulling for you. And I'm doing what I can to fight the spiritual fight. I'm not just pulling for you, I'm praying for you.